If we were to give a couple of examples of how illness is perceived in Japan, we might offer the following. Take cancer, for example. We might say many people get it. Seniors are more likely get it. Or young people could get it. For infertility, we might say it's too bad, but these things happen. Maybe it's a genetic condition, or maybe someone needed to take better care of their health. And probably, a common perception is we don't really know the exact causes of the illnesses. All we can do is to treat the illness. But what if the cause is unwitting internal exposure to radioactive materials? What if the exposure could have been avoided? What if this fact had been hidden? Would you be able to accept that these things just happen? Exposure to radioactive materials can be external or internal. External exposure comes through direct exposure from gamma and neutron rays generated by the explosion of nuclear weapons like atomic bombs, and from radioactive materials remaining on the ground or other surfaces. Internal exposure comes through exposure to radioactive particles ingested by eating, drinking, or inhaling contaminated materials and retained in the body. There is no evidence that internal exposure causes illness, but it cannot be ruled out. While we can wash materials off our bodies, we cannot do that if it is in our bodies. Radioactive materials in the body continues to produce radiation, damaging nearby cells and genes. This could cause an illness. It is also hard to prevent internal exposure. Our five senses are not able to detect radioactive materials. We cannot see, smell, taste, hear, or touch them. We don't know if we are eating or breathing them. Why do radioactive materials exist? The atomic bombs during World War II and the process of making them generated radioactive materials. Numerous nuclear experiments in many places, including Nevada and the Marshall Islands, also generated radioactive materials as part of the development of nuclear weapons since the 1950s. Nuclear power plants promoted as a peaceful use of nuclear fission have also generated radioactive materials. Accidents at 3 Mile Islands, the Chernobyl power plant, and the Fukushima Daiichi power plant generated radiation as well. Radioactive materials produced over many decades like this exist in air, water, and the earth. No living organism on earth can avoid being touched by radioactive materials. But the existence and influence of radioactive materials has been denied. During the war, Imperial Japan made the case that atomic bombs were the most inhumane of weapons and in violation of international laws. In response, the US government denied the existence of radioactive fallout from the atomic bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Yet, the US government had studied and knew the influence of residual radiation and internal exposure and has conducted research since the end of the war. In other words, it grasped both the existence and influence of radioactive materials. On the other hand, the post-war Japanese government has denied that black rain caused internal radiation exposure and ignored appeals from victims without even investigating. From the occupation by the US military to today, the Japanese government attitude is unchanged. Both the US and Japanese governments are covering up radiation exposure and the violation of human rights. It is clear that now we are at a stage where the very earth is exposed to radiation through the development of nuclear weapons and nuclear power plants all over the world. You will be exposed to the radiation if you go close to uranium mines or waste from nuclear power plants. The earth is polluted by radiation, and our health is damaged by exposure to the radiation. What we should do is, first, share a common understanding about the exposure of the earth. And we should raise our voices for the end of nuclear power and the abolishment of nuclear weapons to move towards a nuclear-free world. One of the people who have done this is Japanese meteorologist Masuda Yoshinobu. Dr. Masuda has dedicated his life to research focused on atomic bomb survivors who have struggled to be acknowledged by the Japanese government. While the atomic bomb survivors are aged, so is Dr. Masuda, who will be 98 years old this year. We wanted to let you know about his 30 years of work clarifying the fact related to black rain exposure. Through him, we hope that we can show how we should move forward. Please watch How Far Did Black Rain Fall? Meteorologist Masuda Yoshinobu's Promise.